We've got a familiar face on the call today. It's hot outside, and Nat is clearly one of the hottest tickets in town as well. Nat, welcome. Give us a quick wave so everybody can see you. Nat's actually joined us for the last 2 or 3 coffee breaks, and we're delighted to have her on here today. She has asked to be interrupted to make this the usual interactive session, and let's have some fun. Nat, what is going to talk about trying to balance ambition with work and life. I got an email from somebody yesterday after a Men for Inclusion event saying how great it was and how they'd like to come along to future ones. But the only reason why they were able to get to the event last night was that the kids were at the grandparents', which was giving them the opportunity to work, study, work, study, work, study, and sleep whilst the kids are away. I think that kind of sums it up for me a little bit, Nat. How do we manage this ambition to be great at work, great at home, great as parents, great as sports stars, with life? Nat, over to you. Looking forward to this session. I promise I'll interrupt.
Yes, please definitely do. And thank you so much for the intro, Mark. Hottest ticket in town is, I've been called many things, but that is a first. It's great to have you, everybody in the room. I know the weather is amazing, so I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us to spend the hour. I indeed am going to be talking to concepts around balance, work-life balance, and but what I'm hoping to do is maybe provide a slightly different take and a slightly different perspective on that, drawing on my personal experiences and a lot of the work that I do these days. I do see some familiar faces in the room. I have spoken to quite a few of you, but there's quite a lot of new faces as well. So just by way of a quick intro, my name is Nat. I'm a trained life coach. I'm also a trained health coach, and I've got a background from the corporate world. So prior to kind of establishing myself as a coach, I spent the best part of a decade working as a stockbroker in the city. Which I think gives me quite a unique combination of background when it comes to life success and performance coaching, which is really a term that I've kind of developed for myself. What I'm really passionate is about helping professionals such as yourselves, as well as business owners, basically people in business, to maximize both their professional success as well as their life, their personal life outside of it, right? All the things that are important: health, family, relationships, the things that matter, but sometimes somewhere along the way get lost in the hustle. So that to me is the true definition of success, is really being able to strike that balance and live a life that energizes us in all aspects, most of the time. I appreciate it. That itself is a bit of a balance. So my backstory up until now, I've worked in the city, and that's a career that lasted me the best part of a decade, really an identity that I spent over 30 years of my life building. I've always been somebody who's been rushing around, doing as much as possible, squeezing everything in, kind of reaching high, looking for more. And when it came to starting in the city, I just completely threw myself in. Like, I was a total machine. And about 2 years into my career of working nonstop, of working late nights, very often until 5 in the morning, weekends, the whole thing, my life came to a bit of a standstill. I hit quite severe burnout, depression, was battling with eating disorders, anxiety. It was quite a difficult time. I had to sign off work for a couple of months to start my recovery. But really all of that has kind of really revealed that I had a slightly more so dysfunctional relationship with work and stress. So that took me on a whole kind of journey of personal development. And really what I came to understand is that there was a lot within me that was facilitating, that facilitated the results that I effectively ended up creating. So in the end, once I kind of got to grips with a few things, and I'll share some of those today, I was able to strike a much better balance despite continuing to work in a very stressful and a highly intense environment. Of course, I eventually ended up leaving the city. A year and a half ago, I left to found my coaching venture. But the person that I was leaving the industry was very different to the person that I was in the beginning. But so my intention for today's call is to have a very honest and a very open conversation. I hope you can join me in that. I know this is something that a lot of people experience, but it's something that doesn't, my personal opinion is it doesn't get talked about enough beyond the sort of superficial layer of I feel tired, I feel exhausted, I'm so knackered, I'm so drained, kind of thing. So please be interactive. Please, as things come up for you, I'd love to hear from you in the chat if any of the concepts resonate. And if at any point you want to pop off your mic and just jump in with a question or a personal share, then I'd really appreciate that. What I would love to start with is maybe throw a few questions into the room, and you can just go by a show of hands. I think I can see all of you. I can see most of you on my screen, but I would love to know as a starter who in the room considers themselves to be ambitious. Okay, super. I would have imagined quite a few of you. It kind of comes with the territory, doesn't it? Who in the room considers themselves to be a high performer, or at the very least, an aspiring high performer? Super, fantastic. And does anyone, and think about this objectively, so try to take your emotional kind of attachment to this question out of the equation. To the outside world looking in, maybe your friends, family, colleagues, how many of you would be considered to have a relative degree of success? Doesn't have to be the mansion with the £1 million and a farm. Just generally speaking, relative degree of success. Fantastic. And now to turn the table a little bit, does anyone resonate with this feeling of this kind of niggle to constantly have to be doing more? And if you're not doing, then maybe you're not productive, or maybe you're failing, or maybe you're falling behind. Yeah, quite a few. And who resonates with maybe that nothing you ever do is enough, and you have this constant drive to need to have more, to be more, this sort of not enoughness that's maybe ever present. Okay. Yeah, so quite a few people. And by the way, these are all things that I have been a total yes to in the past, and I still, to this day, it's a relationship that I continue to manage. And it's a path that can be quite easy to go down, or I think especially when we kind of look at our typical type A, highly ambitious, high achieving personality types. My kind of, as a starting point, I think we've been so conditioned in our culture, in kind of the Western way of life. And I think it's probably like a bit of city culture coming into that as well. This mentality of hustle, right? It's about coming in, right? This very traditional model of success, getting up the ladder, hustle, 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 work now, sleep when you're dead, get the grades, get the proper job, right? Proper, earn money, get promoted, buy things. Like there is a certain level of understanding, or like this unspoken understanding of what hard work and what success really looks like, right? And it's a hustle, 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 right? It's a hustle all the time. And I will just slightly caveat that, because I sometimes feel like I maybe come across as maybe dismissive of success. It's not that. I absolutely love the feeling of achievement. I love reaching my targets. I love hitting milestones, and I absolutely love the experiences that building wealth and having money affords me. But what I have seen kind of in myself, and what I see quite often, is somewhere in that kind of hustle, it can be quite easy to lose ourselves in it, and lose our sense of self-worth, our kind of place in the world, lose a sense of our values, what's really important, and what that money that we spend so much time working for, what it really allows us to experience, and what are we working for? Because at the end of the day, it's not just the money, right? I feel like by looking outward, very often we fail to internalize that success by chasing milestones, by just kind of doing for the sake of doing. We're looking for very kind of artificial ways of recognition, perhaps. So that leads to, so if we can't internalize it, that over time, the more we chase, it kind of leads to a lot of frustration, a lack of fulfillment, and we keep chasing and chasing because it's not enough. And inevitably, what ends up happening is it starts taking away from the other areas of our life, because we're so busy and so buried in our to-do list. And our milestone lists and our bucket lists. So naturally, burnout is quite an inevitable point that we can reach with that, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional burnout. They're all kind of slightly different shades to it. So this, actually, let me just see what's happening in the chats. Eating lunch, fantastic. Early symptoms. Okay, we'll get a little bit to symptoms, so I'll be very happy to kind of piggyback off of that. Yeah, to be more realistic. Yeah, my experience is once you hit it, you really do have to take stock and recalibrate. Unfortunately, we don't tend to think preventatively, so a lot of us get to that point of no return, and then we start paying attention. There's a lot of expectation that high-performing people must crave for more and more and more. Well, sometimes you're very good at what you do, but not necessarily really want to continuously to enjoy where you were before starting to think about that. Yeah. That's really interesting, Angela, that you mentioned the external environment, that expectation to be thinking about the next step. Because it can be external, it can also be internal, right? But that's a very good point that you make. It's a very important dynamic to manage. But this kind of constantly moving on to the next thing is one of the kind of traits of what I have come to call the overachiever. And it's something that I like to work with quite a lot. And I feel like sometimes overachievement and maybe, perfectionism, things like being overly ambitious can be worn in kind of in society as a bit of a badge of honor. It's like being busy and being constantly hustling is such an overachiever, right? I've got so much going on, I can't cope with it, but I keep going. And I definitely know that I used to wear it a bit like a badge of honor. I used to feel quite smug about it. It's not an admission that I always feel like I have to swallow the truth a little bit when I make that one. But it's that feeling of getting kicks out of being busy and like constantly striving. I don't know if anyone can relate to that. But what I have come to understand is that really overachievement, things like perfectionism, they're like the shadow expression, the unhealthy expression of ambition, of drive, of achievement. And when I say shadow, so Carl Jung is quite a big guru in psychology. He's worked a lot around the concept of the shadow, which is like the hidden side of the human psyche. It's the part of us that sits in the shadow, and we might not necessarily want to kind of expose, because it might be a little bit messy, a little bit ugly. It's generally speaking, it's things that don't necessarily serve our best intentions. And when I talk about ambition, I kind of very much see it as having both a shadow side as a light side, right? Where there is shadow, there is light. And if there's one sort of takeaway, or one thing that I would love for you to just take away into your day-to-day life, is maybe start thinking about that, how that shadow versus light side of ambition might be playing out for you. And start recognizing like how it expresses within you. Like for me, that was a very key part of understanding how to move forward, and moving forward in a way that was healthy, is really seeing that shadow side for what it was, and start taming it, and then, you know, shining the light a little bit more on the healthy achiever. Because that's where I was able to start creating a life that was more balanced. So really it starts with awareness. And that's, you know, in coaching, we always say that the first step to change is cultivating awareness. And that's where it all starts. So how do we know that we're in our unhealthy, or the shadow kind of expression of the overachiever? Does anyone want to have a guess? Whether it's, how do you know that you might be pushing too hard, or maybe just from your personal experience, whether it's in the emotional realm, maybe it's in the thinking realm, what sort of results, what's your reality
I think for me personally, Nat, it's perhaps having a bit of a foggy brain. So just no longer being able to think clearly, because I'm just putting too much pressure on myself to get things in order. And, you know, so it's definitely kind of get this fogginess of thinking, crikey, I've got myself into such a state. It's even worse now had I've just sat down and been rational about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I guess for me, it's exhaustion. So at some point you just try so hard, and you reach the point when you're just exhausted, you know?
Yeah.
The other one is when you get disappointed because you feel like you've overperformed and it's not recognized, and others are performing more smartly, less but more efficiently, and you feel like you've wasted your time, but at the end of the day you also know that it's your own fault or your own making. And I do often see that. I've seen it personally, a sort of difference. I don't know if it's a man-woman thing, but a tendency to overperform because you think, oh, somebody will reward me in due time on what I'm doing. Whereas some of my bosses were much more practical and saying, what is it that I need to do to be rewarded, and tick the boxes. Basically, I'll do this, that, and that, but I won't need to do X, Y, Z. And it helps a lot because it's very pragmatic. Whereas I would tend to do a lot more with the expectations, and sorry to take a long time on this, but I didn't realize the weight of expectations until I left the corporate world to be freelance and to define my own targets, because I realized that everything I was doing was with the expectation of one day being rewarded for it. And it has driven all of my career of 30 years in and it's a heavy weight that I never realized was so strong until I got rid of it completely.
Yeah, that's amazing, Lilia, thank you. And it's interesting because actually when we go into the world of self-employment and freelancing, it can also be sometimes easy to kind of create that kind of working and recreate that same working environment for ourselves. So again, it can be kind of an external battle, and it can be internal. I think we can possibly sometimes manage these tensions a little bit better when it's just us. But once we kind of square off the source of that tension to begin with. But yeah, you're absolutely right. All of the things that you mentioned, and there was a question about signs of burnout. These are all, burnout is a bit like a spectrum. Like you have burnout where you physically are unable to get out of bed, which I got to. But there is it kind of starts a little bit earlier than that, and it progresses. So often when we talk about burnout in just today's world, in kind of casual language, it starts with feelings of exhaustion. Katie, you mentioned brain fog, right? It's ironically, it starts affecting our performance. Like we can't see straight. And maybe we even start cutting corners because there's so much on our plate that we just need to get it off quickly. So we're not even doing a great job anymore, which is the very thing that this whole thing often starts with.
Yeah, Nat, for me, because I mentioned about burnout in the chat.
Yes.
I didn't really feel exhausted. I think I'd just been so used to running on so much adrenaline, and that was in a previous job. But when I realized I was burnt out was the end of a really busy season, and it was like the day I just could never finish anything. I just felt like I'd been working like 16-hour days for constantly, and I'd get up and I'd go and perform. But then I noticed that I started becoming more irritable, more short, more defensive. When people would ask me very innocuous questions, I'm too busy for you. I don't have time to speak to you, which is not a normal reaction. And then I realized that actually I just needed to maybe take some time out. And actually, I didn't realize it at the time, but when I walked out of the office, I passed by at that time at London Bridge, there was W.H. Smith, and I put on this book, The Joy of Burnout. And as I read it, I then recognized a lot of things. And so then I took some time off to try to deal with it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting because a lot of people don't recognize that I actually had it pointed out to me by my mother. I thought I was just badly hit with depression, and it was pointed out to me. I was like, wow, I was so in my own world. I don't think the word burnout just even was in my dictionary. Like that's not a thing that can happen to me because I am so good at what I do and I'm so dedicated that it's just not for me. Depression was in my vocab, I guess, but it's funny how we can just not even be remotely aware of what's happening around us, but it does happen to quite a lot of us, I think, especially with and maybe that's the nature of mental health, is that it is quite invisible, so it can be difficult to just diagnose it straight away. If your leg hurts or if you break your bone, it's a lot easier to kind of go straight into the solution, right? But thank you for sharing that. But yeah, on the whole, your shadow kind of side of your overachiever will be creating what's present in your reality is how you start identifying that might be what's at play here. So results like feeling overwhelmed, feeling chronically stressed, feeling burnt out, not having time. Maybe you start feeling unfulfilled at work or just generally speaking in life. It's when you start to kind of lose connection with the world around you, with people around you, what it is that you're doing. And you just get to a point where you kind of lack energy, you lack stamina, you lack the passion, you lack joy, it kind of, things are just off. And I often would call it a bit of an identity crisis, because for me, it got to the point where I just completely didn't recognize the person that I was. Like, where was the ambitious person that I used to? I can't, physically unable to do anything anymore. But so I would be really paying attention to a lot of these signs of, you know, not just physical symptoms of exhaustion, but just what's happening kind of at head level, anxiety, stress, what's happening in, you know, and at the soul level, bit of a spiritual term, but, you know, fulfillment, happiness, just joy. These are all things that we all need in life. So that's obviously not a healthy place to be. So it is an important first step to recognize the signals. And in terms of how we get there, it's really comes down to, well, it comes down to a sequence of things, but, you know, at the most superficial level, it's, apologies, I thought somebody was trying to get in through the, oh, and here comes Benji.
Does anyone have any thoughts at the moment? Obviously, it seems to be resonating with all of us, and there's quite a few messages in the chat as well. Does anyone want to kind of chip in and you know, express how they're feeling?
I think something that I always find really interesting, especially in talks like this, is just how many people have been in similar situations. And it's sometimes just really nice actually just to be in a space like this where you realize that you also aren't alone.
Yeah, it's encouraging, isn't it? Yeah.
It's just so lovely actually to just, and even Nat, when Nat was sharing her story, it's just really so lovely just to like hear other people say it, because I think so often we take everyone at face value and we see them as being fine, and we just think it's us that's kind of broken or not working.
Yeah, absolutely.
Apologies about that. I have a 4-month-old puppy at home, which just kicks off at everything. Grace, you know, this is my experience with this whole thing. There's so much talk about mental health and you know, even burnout is being talked about in the workplace, but the conversations, you can never tell who's actually going through what, because it is quite an invisible thing. And maybe it is a trait of the high performer that we're very good at hiding or just masking and just, you know, getting ourselves to just crack on and just get the job done, show up at work. It's just one more day, which maybe makes the whole kind of conundrum even trickier, because it's that much harder to see what people might be going through. But I do find that a lot of people, it's not uncommon, and yet we don't have, it's very rare to have these conversations in, you know, at work and in the office setting. It's always in kind of quite dedicated sessions like this one, where we get together to talk about something that we might be going through or get a bit of perspective. Nat,
why do you think this isn't spoken about in the workplace? I know, you know, so other people think that this coffee break is a safe, confidential, you know, community, but really these discussions should be taking place in the workplace as well.
Yeah, and I have to say, I'm always a little, I always feel a little bit conflicted as well when it comes to talking in the corporate forum, because I feel like the big fear is that it's going to take away from performance, from output, or that you might be perceived as maybe being weaker, or like you might not be able to handle it, or you might not get as involved. People might not involve you as much in things, because if you're quote unquote struggling or having a difficult time managing pressures, I think I think that's probably what plays out for the person that might be going through that experience. When it comes to, because there are two sides, there are the employees, but there are also employers, right? And I have found it really depends on the person. It really depends on the culture of the business, or even the business unit, even down to the team. There is so much variety within a business. But it really comes down to also, the perspective of leadership. And I think there is still quite a lot of quite outdated philosophy that, more is more. And even though there's a lot of money that's being put behind mental health and work-life balance, some of it is, I have found, and that's kind of the feedback that I hear from colleagues as well, because of course I'm not in that setting anymore, is it's a bit of a PR campaign at times, not always, but really, again, variety within team. I think it comes down to performance, right? Can we sustain the same level if we start opening the conversation up in a really in a way that, because ultimately opening up the conversation will lead to you kind of have to, when you ask for feedback, you have to be open to responding to it. And I wonder whether we're really ready to really respond to it in the way that we should. So
Now, I have a question, if I may. So we talked a bit around sort of the signs of burnout, and I think sometimes you can identify those signs and they can come in waves. So sometimes you may feel a certain way, and then it goes away for a period of time and you think, oh, actually, I'm absolutely fine. What coping techniques would you, or tips would you give to sort of help manage that feeling where, you have a negative feeling over how well you're doing, that you're underperforming, but you're doing everything and yet you're exhausted? How much more can you do? What coping tips as well would you say for being to coach people in being happy with their lot and happy with themselves and what they have done?
Mm-hmm. Well, so if I were to ask you the question of the outsider looking in, would they say that you have done enough or have done a good job? I don't like the term good job. It makes me feel like a 5-year-old girl, but what would they say?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's all about perspective, isn't it? So I think it would depend who you ask, I think, and it would also be my view on what they think, and I may not necessarily really know in essence what they really do think. So it's probably people who are closest to you will say you're working really hard, you're busy all the time, you're doing a great job, look at you, blah blah blah. And then yet you may have a manager or a senior stakeholder that you're working with, and perhaps you're never quite moving quick enough for what they need you to do, etc. So you get the pressure. And then also working alongside your peers, you're doing everything you can, but you feel like you need to work harder because other peers may seem or appear that they're working better than you to yourself. So I think it all depends on the perspective.
Yeah, and there is a bit of comparison there as well. I think it was Lilia that mentioned a little bit about the comparison trap. The number one thing is you got to focus on you. Leave everybody else out of the room. It's in so many aspects, whether it's your performance, whether it's you want to ask a question but it might be stupid. Don't focus on everybody else, focus on you. And I think, to me, there was the mechanic kind of work of getting really clear on like what the priorities are, what drives because it's all performance based, right? Doing a good job is performance based. What's actually going to drive the result for you, getting really clear on your priorities. And if you can honestly say that at the end of the day you have attended to those and you have done the best job that you can, you have to trust yourself that is the truth. And you have to draw the line. at what's a realistic number of hours to be working a day. I don't know. That's, again, it's very individualistic. So for some people, some amazing people seem to be able to work 14 hours a day, and they never, that they thrive of that. For a lot of us, it's somewhere between 8 to 10 hours, right? And the more I kind of learn about myself, I actually realize that I can just do 6 hours a day and I can have an amazing result, and I don't need to be doing any more than that. But so getting really clear on, where do you draw the line? Have I given my best effort today? And when it comes to managing dynamics, external dynamics of people around us, forget about everybody else. And it's, with managers, it can be a bit tricky, because I appreciate that people sometimes push us to do more and expect us to do more. I think there is a point at which we have to get honest with ourselves, whether that is something that we can keep up with, and whether we want to have a conversation about that standard that is being kind of put as the benchmark. And it doesn't make you weak if you don't keep up with the standard, because sometimes we can feel like we're weaker, we can't keep up. Well, maybe the standard is weak because it's unrealistic, and we're just human. So, when I'm in a room like this, I really would have a difficult time to feel that anyone isn't doing a good enough job and isn't putting the effort in. So it's about remembering that. And that, one of the traits of the overachiever in the kind of shadow side is exactly that. It's getting caught up in the spiral of, not enough, of taking perfectionistic action, of, having to chase, comparing our success to the success of others, right? And it kind of, like, what ends up happening is we end up living in a lot of fear and anxiety over the results that we create, and we actually fail to recognize that the small wins, or again, the spectrum of success that we might have.
Thank you, Nat.
Yeah.
The one thing, maybe, I don't know how you deal with it, but it starts from the beginning of your career. Is when you start, you want to prove yourself, and therefore you have a tendency to overachieve. Then you set expectations not only for yourself, but for the others. And you're establishing a sort of benchmark which is very high, and feel like you can't go back, because if you've been there, it's very difficult to say, oh, I can't do anymore, I need to go back. I feel like it's the beginning which is an issue. And even when you change job, you want to prove yourself, and you start again to go into this overperformance. It's defining benchmarks which are unsustainable in a way. Yeah. It's an endless story, but maybe the beginning is the most important phase. Yeah, and I don't know how to handle it.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And it comes down to that internal, that's the thing that we can control. And for a long time, I found myself slightly stuck in like victimhood. And kind of outsourcing the blame to other people. But people really just give you what you where you set, exactly to your point. If you set the expectation that you are always perfect, and you're my pitch books were the best pitch books in the corporate finance arm that I was working in. And then I had, I was working on 5 teams at the same time, because that's the standard that I set. And I kept saying yes to that, rather than putting up my hand and saying, honestly, I can't take any more work on. And we can talk about industry, we can talk about our professions being stressful, but we also have to look inwards. I think, yes, the industry has a long way to go, and there are things that can be done to improve. But there is a part that, there's a part where we have to also take responsibility for setting the standard, for setting our standard. Yeah, but that's a great point, Lilia. With the perfectionist action, I very often someone once introduced me to the concept of juggling balls. And in life, at work, you have your glass balls and you have your rubber balls. And rubber balls, you can kind of drop and they'll bounce back. So they're sort of your lesser priority items. Some balls you can't drop because they're made out of glass. And I think this can come down to, we can talk about this in the context of priorities, but also with maybe, perfectionistic action, because I appreciate that sometimes we want to do a really good job. And there's some pitch books that are worth going the extra mile for, right? There's some presentations that you really just want to make sure that it's maybe not perfect because that doesn't exist, but that you've put in the extra mile. So maybe that's your glass ball. But a lot of the time, especially with us kind of highly ambitious people, we have to recognize that 50% perfect, that's better than that's kind of like 80% for the rest of humanity. It really is good enough. So when I get stuck in my perfectionistic pattern, and I notice that I'm dwelling on things and maybe over perfecting and over performing, over rehearsing to the point where it's just giving me a headache, really have to take a step back and just ask, where am I on the spectrum? Is it 50%? Because if it's 50, then I know that I can drive it home, like absolutely no problem. And the incremental return on putting in an extra 25% to get to 75%, most of the time, the difference in that result, you can see it, but it's not worth the effort. So which ball is your glass ball that you're not going to drop and that is worth going the extra mile for, rather than treating every ball as a glass ball? And I would, we talk a lot about work, but it's the same in personal life, because we can sometimes say yes to everything and everybody, just as much at work as in our personal lives. Oh, sorry, I thought Laura was coming on.
Oh no, I was just going to say I love the glass bowl idea. I'm going to use that, so thank you.
Yeah, because that's where we get into never-ending to-do lists, right? There's a certain thrill that comes with to-do lists because you get to take something off. But not everything has to be done today. Not everything has to be done this week. Some things just don't have to be done like for another 2 years, but yet they're there every day. And we write them out over and over and over again. So getting really clear on that, what is I like to work with a focus list. Just what is my focus? What are the 1, 2, 3 things that I need to nail today, this week? Not the 100 gazillion things, just my 1, 2, 3 points that are going to give me the biggest return.
This is, I think Angela is making exactly the point I wanted to make. It's how do you define what is the glass and what is the rubber? Is it in the eye of your manager? And therefore you think of the reward, the actual, what you want to achieve out of it. Is it in your mind? What is your priority from your work content perspective, or is it what will bring you the money at the end of the year, basically?
Well, this is where it's important to, I was going to ask, what's important to you, Lilia? Because it's important to first recognize what values what is important to us? What do we value? Because if it's just getting the paycheck and getting the reward, that's okay. That's not a bad answer. But very often we act like that is the case, and we forget that actually, I discovered that actually freedom was my top value, but I was chasing financial stability so hard that I stripped myself of all of freedom. I also found that fulfillment was important to me. So what's important to you when it comes to working, because that really does help in kind of breaking the list apart. When you're clear on what's important to you, you can, it's like the rubber balls just sometimes automatically fall off. It becomes clearer what your focus list is. When it comes to managing the team dynamics and working with managers, because there is that layer, and we all have professional responsibilities and we're held accountable for. It's what results are you actually measured against? What are the KPIs that you are held accountable to? We forget that often. As a salesperson, my targets were financial, were sales driven. Very often I ended up getting caught in projects that had nothing to do with it, going down rabbit holes that really didn't give me any outcome. So getting clear on your KPIs. And are you familiar with the 80-20 rule? The Pareto, yeah. So what is the 80%, the 20% of actions that are going to drive that result? They're going to get you closer to hitting your KPIs so that you can work a 9, 10, 8-hour day.
Yeah, I would just say that KPIs in sales are very clear, black and white. There are lots of KPIs and which are non-said, and you need to understand the rules of the game to be able to prioritize properly. And sometimes that can be the tricky bit. Yeah.
So I would
more difficult than that.
So I would start off with drawing some sort of list of all potential KPIs that you might be judged against. So whether they're financial or less tangible, because maybe it is. I can relate to that because in the first couple of years I was in a non kind of behind the scenes. So what are the parameters that you're being evaluated on? Maybe it's something to do with making connections, networking. That's quite a hard one sometimes because you kind of connect with a lot of people, but you don't know who's going to lead to what. And if you're in events management or sorry, I'm thinking about my corporate access team within banking, so sort of events management on the financial side. What are you being potentially evaluated on? Just do like a brain dump have a list and then circle, the top 3-5 that once you look at the whole list that are actually the top KPIs, whether they're tangible or intangible. And for those, I would then do another kind of brainstorming exercise, another brain dump of looking at what I think drives the result theoretically, and then also what has worked in the past of driving that result. So the theoretical bit is to get a bit more creative than just past the point of practicalities of past performance. And the past performance is a good indicator, so it's good to include that as well. And you'll also create a list of activities that lead to those KPIs. And when it comes to the glass versus rubber, this is where you ask the question, well, which is the biggest impact activity that will drive into my result? And again, we circle. Because we spend so much time focusing on things that we could always be doing more, and we spend so much time on things that don't give us a result. So of course it's never enough, because we're not focusing on the right things, we're not getting the results, and we still have to do the thing that's actually going to drive the result. And to make things more complicated, sometimes the saboteur comes in because we don't want to do the thing that we know drives the result because it's probably the most uncomfortable thing to be doing, like picking up the phone and making a sales call. Right? So maybe I'd rather just write a perfect looking email because that's easier, but it's not the same impact. The most impactful thing to do is to just pick up the phone and have a conversation. That's in my case. So I hope that helps. Let me have a look at the chat. If anyone has any more questions, I could talk for the entire afternoon. I'm just going to have a scroll through to see whether I have missed anyone.
Nat, I think something that came up for me just when you were like talking now is, I think sometimes I don't value getting clarity and actually taking a step back, and how important that is. Like when you were busy talking about KPIs and those types of things, I think so often I get excited about jumping into something, and doing something that I actually then end up with so much on my plate and not, then feeling overwhelmed and kind of going down the same, trajectory that isn't going to help. And I think it was just so helpful when you were kind of talking through the KPIs, and it's like sometimes actually it's just taking a step back and like actually just, it's almost like slowing down to speed up. I don't know if that even makes sense. Yeah. But that was definitely something that came through when you were just like talking about that KPIs, and yeah, so interesting. Yeah, it's really worth doing that. I find it really, you just made me think about kind of project management a bit. When we're diving into something that's new, I have tendencies to overthink and overanalyze because I want to create the perfect thing. And so there's a risk that I do go into a rabbit hole, and I'll get the results, but it's going to take me twice as long, if not more, because I'll have to explore every single aspect before I get to my results. But if I can take a step back and just ask myself, what do I want out of this? What message do I want to deliver? What is my intention with this project? Even if I'm not clear on what that looks like, I guess that's the whole reason why we end up going rabbit holes. What is my intention? What do I, if I did know the answer, what would the result look like? And create a bit of a structure and then start working towards that and filling in the gaps.
Nat, how do you create some degree of separation between, so we've obviously talked a lot about work, but then also the things that are good for us that aren't work related. How do you mentally decompartmentalize that and make sure that you're able to do those things that are good for you and, keep you strong effectively?
So tell me a bit more about the sorry, I'm going to struggle to pronounce.
So yeah, the difference between work-life balance effectively. So we'll talk a lot about work and KPIs and performance and managing expectations and ensuring that effectively we don't burn out. But then those things that enable us to take a break and make sure we're not working too many hours but making time for ourselves. How do you manage that and make sure that you're making time for the things that are obviously good for you?
So this and I did this when I was in corporate as well. I got very good at drawing the line at the end of the day. It's actually a lot. It's easier for me to do these things now because I kind of work for me. But so it was I had a bit more tension around this when I was working in corporate. But I had to get really clear with myself, what can I realistically sustain? And to me, it came down to, well, what can I sustain with what's expected of me? So when I was working in stockbroking, it was 7 till 5. But 5 o'clock came and I was, unless we had an end of day meeting that I absolutely had to be in, I had to get up and go, because that was And the temptation is to stay because your colleagues are still there. Your boss might still be there. But I have to trust myself that I have done what I can, and that also me leaving to look after my fitness, going out for dinner, just getting home to even watch a bit of TV, whatever whatever is going to give you a bit of headspace. That's actually the right call to make. So it's kind of about getting a little bit selfish, but from the perspective that it's actually going to make you a better, a better performer the next day, right?
Yeah, I hear you. I guess it's a hard discipline to create sometimes.
It's hard, but trust me, it gets easier. And I think that's the hardest bit sometimes, is when we're surrounded by other people who are following a certain protocol, is actually being the one that doesn't follow it to a T. Quite frankly, I don't know why more people don't do that. Because what I have found is that most people are sat there thinking, I don't have anything left in me today. I wish I could just go.
Nat, the time has sped by and the hour is up, and I'm seeing some people obviously needing to get up for other calls. Can I just make a suggestion here? Because obviously there's some conversations going on. Can we just say goodbye to those people that need to go and look forward to seeing you next week? And then we can close the formal part of the session. And if you've got time, if you wanted to stay on with anybody that wanted to stay on, then we can keep the call open, and you can carry on the chat for as long as you like. Apart from the fact that I need my Zoom back at 1:30.
Absolutely, Mark.
So listen, everybody, wonderful. Nat, thank you so much. I didn't interrupt. I think I interrupted once, asked one question, because it was absolutely engrossing, and brilliant. And I hope we can have you back some stage. I'm going to round off really quickly now. Obviously, coffee break next week. Really looking forward to that. Similar topic, and I think it's one of the last ones before we have a summer break. Is that right, Katie? Also, obviously, disappointing news that our members' social that was due for next week has had to be delayed by a month. Anyone who's booked up for that, you should have had a mail from Katie to talk about the planning. Sorry, I need that tea has run out. I'm going to say goodbye for now. I'm going to stop recording. See you all next week. Thank you, Nat. Hang on if you want to continue the chat with Nat.
Thank you.
Thank you.